All right. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the NeuroFlex podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. If you guys have ever heard of neurofeedback before, this is a technology where we're basically measuring the electrical activity of the brain and then feeding it back to people. So in terms of rewarding certain brainwave frequencies that we're training. So someone might be watching some media on a screen. They would see the screen become clear, the audio becomes louder when the person's brain is producing those desired electrical frequencies. And then when the brain deviates from that healthy activity, the screen gets dimmer, the audio gets quieter. So hence the negative and positive feedback there. So that's one of the technologies that we offer here at NeuroFlex. If you're in Fort Lauderdale, Miami, we do neurofeedback as a mobile service. It's all guided based on the QEEG brain mapping assessment, along with your specific training goals. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and check us out at www.neuroflex.com. That's NUROFLEX.com. On to today's show, we have a very special guest, Adam Coape-Arnold. Adam is the CEO and founder of Cubed Biotech, Inc., and he has a decade of experience owning and operating premium brands in the regulated industries of raw dairy, yogurt, and cannabis, with over $50 million in sales to date. Cubed is a Montreal-based Canadian company that intends to develop and produce psychedelic medicine inspired by historical ethnobotany to disrupt the current treatments of mental illness and addiction. Cubed intends to cultivate, extract, and also synthesize natural entheogens, including Psilocybin from mushrooms, Mescaline from cacti, and Ayahuasca's DMT and MAO-inhibitors, along with manufacture pharmaceutical mental health and addiction medicines and develop its own proprietary compounds through clinical trials for pharmaceutical-grade distribution and commercialization. So Adam, really excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Toby. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Awesome. So tell me a little about kind of your career in terms of I mentioned you did some work in the cannabis space. Was that kind of a smooth transition from cannabis to psychedelics? Is it a completely different ballgame? Tell me a little about that.
Yeah. So the last decade, as you said, I've been in regulatory operations, and I was rather naive to get into it, especially dairy with such a competitive sort of dollar in, 4 quarters out profiteering, I guess you could call it, a low margin industry. We call it FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, as opposed to CPG. We started with $5, my fiance Eloise and I, and eventually wound up selling almost $10 million of yogurt and dairy and ice cream and butter about 2 or 3 years later. That really prepared me for the confluence of branding, which I had been doing in restaurants and franchising and musicians and record labels for about 10 years prior, with controlled substances, regulated products. In Quebec and Canada in general, milk is highly regulated, more so than the US in terms of the bovine growth hormone and different things that aren't allowed in any Canadian milk, not just organic, meaning the provinces and the federal government have strict control over everything, not just the end products being safe, but the amount of fat, protein, and lactose that we're using on a very sort of per gram basis. So when we're dealing with 5 million liters of milk a year picked up by our raw tanker from grass-fed and regular predominantly Holstein and Jersey cow farms in eastern townships of Quebec, we're dealing with pretty strict regulations that absolutely informed me to get into cannabis and then psychedelics. For cannabis, I've worked for 3 companies in Montreal, AAA Medic, Great White North, and MTL Cannabis, and cut my teeth on everything but cultivation. So getting licenses, from sales licenses to deal with individual provinces, direct sales to the distributor who is the province, to setting up water extraction, which informed my water, methanol, and ethanol extractions of psychedelics that will we begin anytime soon once we get our dealer's license, a controlled substance license in Canada from Health Canada that is the equivalent in the US of a DEA license to be able to work with these controlled substances. specifically the classic psychedelics. When we talk about natural entheogens, we're talking about really, for me, mushrooms, cacti, and ayahuasca, which is chacruta, the DMT plant P. viridis, plus Banisteriopsis caapi, which is the vine with the 3 reversible MAO inhibitors, harmine, harmaline, and harmalol, amongst others. But those are the interesting ones, therapeutic. So yeah, naive to get into an industry, especially in Canada, where there are only a couple of big dairy companies, and they were all intrigued, from General Mills to Parmalat. They all were intrigued by why we're selling yogurt for 2.5 times the price. And the answer was, well, I won't call it therapeutic, but we had an A2 beta casein protein from these Jersey cows, single origin farms, that we were selling in real Greek yogurt, meaning strained 50%, no powders or anything added or any mechanical separation. And that brought people back to dairy. So a certain amount, about 20% of people who think they're lactose intolerant, actually have this sort of modernized protein, the A1, which is a problem with it, digesting it, which is the typical black and white Holstein cows that we see from Ben & Jerry's branding to, in Canada, about 98-99% of all cows. So we realized that de-innovating, and I think this is very important from my dairy experience, I de-innovated. I went back to real Greek gravity straining. We went back to a cow that was from the Jersey Island, the Channel Islands between England and France, like a Guernsey cow as well, these cute little brown cows, as well as some Indian cows that, are sort of pre-modernization or pre-industrialization in terms of, agricultural and cows. So what that informed me in psychedelics is the natural entheogens. And our company, we certainly have the ability and will have the ability to synthesize molecules like MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin, which would be considered semi-synthetically from organic, foundations like 5-hydroxyindole, but really focusing on what we learned from cannabis too, which is the consumer wants what he wants, she wants. We're looking at Oregon and Washington probably shutting out synthetic APIs. So I think that we took a chance a year and a half ago when we incorporated, but raising money, which we appear to be one of the only people that can raise money in this current environment, October, November 2022, where the whole world is sort of crumbling financially as well, to stick and to be stubborn. I'll use that word, somewhat facetiously, to be stubborn, to stick to classic psychedelics, stick to the tryptamines we know are working, like psilocybin and psilocin, the active, the prodrug psilocybin needs to be converted through the liver, and the psilocin is what acts upon our serotonergic receptors, and this whole concept of the default mode network, the parts of our brain that are reset, the parts of our brain that have negative thought loops. We've invested quite a bit. We had a $575,000 grant at McGill to study the default mode network with Dr. Rose Baggett in a rat model, and that was a lot of money was given by McGill, ourselves, the Ludmer Foundation, but also the Ministry of Economy and Innovation in Quebec signed off on this, knowing that the mental health issues, immunity, mental health are all very important for the citizenry here. So we're seeing a lot of money in Quebec that might not be available in the rest of Canada or the US, flowing in through like biopharmaceutical foundations. The CQDM, for instance, put in a couple hundred grants. So we're really seeing, coming out of pandemic, how it merges with psychedelic medications, which, there was one medication 50 years ago from Sandoz, from Hoffman, which was called Indocybin. It was 2 milligrams, which right now would be considered a mini dose, not a micro subperceptual, on the line, depending on a person, but on the line of what we would call psychedelic or perceptual, meaning the person can actually perceive that they're on something, as opposed to a microdose where you really are not aware throughout the day. Until the end of the day, you have to remind yourself, oh, I feel calmer, I have less anxiety because I did it this morning. That's sort of the goal of microdosing, is not to have a psychedelic hallucinatory experience. So, we're seeing a lot of convergence on a 25 milligram therapeutic sample in terms of NYU Langone has taken over 60 days, day 1, day 30, day 60. And people have not had a drink in years. So this is absolutely disruptive and transformative. And the paradox that I'm finding, or that I perceive will happen, is, and this is what's probably scaring some big pharmaceuticals to get in, the more you take, the less you need. That's the paradox, meaning it's actually, I'll be careful not to use the word cure or heal, but there's certainly some long-term benefits that means you do not need to take medication every day, like SSRIs, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, and Effexor. So the model of one molecule for one disease is being broken, but also the concept of a certain amount of revenue per year, hooking people on these drugs every day with side effects, 50, 60, 70% in surveys will say that it helps them. But I believe that part of that is sort of a cognitive bias where you want to believe things are helping. Anecdotally, there's a lot of side effects with some of these SSRI antidepressants. We know that. Prozac is currently off patent and they're trying to repurpose it for other issues. So, and it's the only one that kids are really technically allowed to be taking in terms of the clinical trial proof. So a lot going on, a lot informing me to reiterate from consumer demand in yogurt and cannabis, but on a wellness basis. And I do think that we will see a bifurcation of what we call here natural health products or dietary supplements in the US, OTC products that are sub-perceptual. For instance, in Canada, Health Canada has approved Amanita muscaria, the red and white, beautiful Alice in Wonderland mushroom, which has ibotenic acid, which is in theory a neurotoxin that shouldn't be taken, but it breaks down under decarboxylation to muscimol. Muscimol has some fascinating properties that people are using right now for sedatives, to deal with arthritis. There's a couple other things because it affects the GABA receptor. It's an agonist of the GABA receptor. So that suggests that Canada, which has always been first in compassionate grounded use of controlled substances like cannabis, we have a whole medical regime that became recreational, doing well, no bad stories of people crashing over, the night after it's legal. It's been very somewhat sterilized, but it's been a very safe rollout. So Health Canada, the Minister of Health, the discussion right now is the multi-regulatory path in Canada, which started with a section 56.1 exemption to the criminal code, meaning individuals were exempt to get mushrooms off the black market or sometimes from dealers' license companies, the equivalent of the DA lab that can produce these molecules naturally or synthetically. That started taking a year. And this would be interesting. So Canada did not start allowing psilocybin and other psychedelics for their actual purpose of resetting the default mode network for mental health and addictions. It was on compassionate grounds for people with a certain cancer and a certain amount of time to live. That I would call it spiritual palliation. So what that means is Health Canada and the ministers at the time, Patty Haydu, now Jean-Yves Duclos, who's from Quebec City, not too far from Montreal in Quebec, they were looking at the charter rights in Canada, similar to Constitution, Bill of Rights, et cetera, in the US, looking at compassion, not the medical necessity. And that's very interesting because that's how cannabis started here. And I think it's usually the easiest way to get into the actually dosing patients. In January, and not many people know this in Canada or anywhere else, because you're really not allowed to market this as a DL supplier, dealer's license supplier, the special access program re-added psilocybin that was taken off 15, 20 years ago to the special access program. And there's two categories. Typically, special access is a last resort that a doctor would requisition Health Canada in a 48-hour turnaround if all the paperwork's there. If they had taken every medication under the sun, let's say for depression, SSRIs or MAO-inhibitors in the past or tetracyclines, and you could import a drug that's not available in Canada. That was the special access category one. But category two is, providing drugs that don't exist through the dealer's license lab. And now there's a list, I don't think it's public, but I saw it in a press release. It's like 5 to 10 dealer's license companies that can supply psilocybin to people with a doctor's note. Not every doctor's note takes 48 hours. Sometimes you have the proof that it's a last resort isn't there, or the paperwork was misfiled, or you don't have a dealer's license lab because the labs cannot advertise. But right now there is absolutely medical access to psilocybin and other potential, psychedelic mental health medications that are essentially APIs, encapsulated APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. Synthetic psilocybin would be obviously the number one product that's going into people's hands. In Quebec, there's 1 or 2 people who receive special access. I don't think Health Canada talks about how many people, but there's tons of different drugs that people are applying for the special access program that are not necessarily mental health or psychedelic related. So it is a process, a bureaucratic process that is meant to be relatively quick, as opposed to the Section 56, the first access point in Canada that took now up to a year, and TheraPsil is fighting on a constitutional basis to go faster. I would suggest we go into the special access program for all these people to get quicker access. But the third, the final regulations, if I could call it that, which we're anticipating, we have no feedback necessarily right now, but we would like to play a part. I'm part of the Canadian part of Psychedelics Canada, an association who is liaisoning with the government, because there's a lot of experts coming in the psychedelic biotech world. I personally perceive that Health Canada will allow these APIs in, not on a federal regulatory basis, but how GW Pharma brought Epidiolex in to the American world for Dravet syndrome, for seizures in young children as an orphan drug, where they didn't wait for any cannabis, marijuana legalization. Dr. Jeffrey Guy from GW Pharma, now owned by Jazz Pharma, is pushed with his own money, his own raised capital, and spent a ton of money to get this product to market. That means the psychedelic biotechs have the onus, not necessarily the federal government, Health Canada, or the FDA. I do believe it's possible that Biden or whomever's next could legalize, as cannabis is, slowly meandering towards getting out of this multi-state concept and a federal concept, not hemp, CBD derived from hemp, which is legal everywhere. But, why can't we have a natural health product of muscimol? Why can't we have a sub-perceptual 1 milligram microdose? I do believe that the world is now really starting, the concept and the education, the destigmatization of psychedelics is really happening on Netflix, more so than anywhere else. Obviously, great magazines and newspapers are picking this up. But what I mean by that is popular psychology, the popular North American media are doing the job of the biotechs. They are educating the populace. And it's sort of like that watershed moment in cannabis a couple of years ago, where everybody's grandmother at Thanksgiving, they were talking about CBD ointment for arthritis. In Quebec, they have some draconian rules that don't allow any CBD tinctures or lotions or anything, which obviously would help people without any side effects, through the skin, whether there's some THC or not. But I do believe that, the consumers, the patients, citizens should take a larger role in defining the regulatory pathways, which is not always just APIs for pharma that are, blister packed like Prozac in a pharmacy. In Canada, we quote unquote have free healthcare. It's not actually free healthcare. I hope the NDP, Jagmeet Singh, the leader who wants full pharmacare, meaning glasses, dentists, no copays on certain medications. I'm hoping that progressive stance will win out in the US and Canada, allowing people to have access, not necessarily just to a therapeutic sit down, in a nice sort of Moroccan pillowed area with a MD or psychiatrist, but would enable everyone to benefit from the subperceptual anti-anxiety, clearing of the brain, from 1 to 10 to 25 milligrams, natural or synthetic, because we're seeing that it works. Absolutely.
Got it. Well, Adam, people I feel like who've been following the, psychedelic therapy resurgence, have heard a lot about psilocybin. Tell me, the other couple that we had mentioned, so the mescaline from Cacti, and then ayahuasca's DMT, and then also the MAO inhibitors. Tell me about kind of what you've seen in terms of the therapeutic potential of those different chemicals.
Yeah, and we have to include LSD as well. It's hard to come from natural because it's basically a toxin to grow it. The claviceps is like not a healthy thing to have around breathing humans. But what we're seeing, most people are focusing on semi-synthetic psilocybin. But coming out of Wonderland, my number one ask from other pharma or biotech companies was ibogaine and MDMA. Ibogaine for addiction has been used in west coast of Canada, but it's sort of a little more difficult to access. It's tough from Gabon, Cameroon to export the Tabernath iboga shrub. There is a couple other actually higher percentages of different trees you can get it from, but ibogaine, to naturally extract it, is about 1 to 3 steps, but to produce it semi-synthetically, it's 20 steps. Very difficult, because that presumes it could be up to a month to actually produce, even a small scale. So mescaline, coming from 3 cacti, peyote, San Pedro, and Peruvian torch, amongst others, but those are the 3. Number one, peyote, even in California, when it was tabled and taken back, full legalization without commercial, without the sales, they didn't allow peyote. I think it'll be interesting to Americans and Canadians that peyote is not a controlled substance. I'm not allowed to use it no matter what, because of the ethno-religious and potentially over farming or over harvesting and overuse. So we talk about, growing San Pedro, because peyote takes years and years anyway. It's not a commercially scalable product naturally. But Peruvian torch and San Pedro, which look more traditional tall cacti you'd see in the desert. That mescaline is sort of like in a watermelon. It's right inside the outside green area where it becomes sort of white. Not exactly easy and not a huge part of the plant, but mescaline I would really simply describe as a feel good. There, especially synthetically, from what I'm hearing, there's less of a first hour anxiety or issues that psilocybin has. Psilocybin, number one, our body has to break down the chitin, the equivalent of cell walls, but chitin is what crustaceans are made of, the hard shells and crabs and lobster. That's what our body's breaking down. There's a lot of psilocin in the chitin, but really the body, you can feel it on the stomach if it's a natural mushroom you're eating, not an extract, but also the hepatic, bypass of, converting the prodrug psilocybin to psilocin to be active. An extract will help that, a pill even more so. But we're seeing that, mescaline doesn't necessarily have, it could go up and down in terms of what we would casually call a trip or the therapeutic experience. But it hasn't been talked about as much as I'd like it to see. It's not a tryptamine, it's a phenethylamine, which is, like MDMA, sort of empathogen and tactogen, sort of more, that's why I call it feel good, empathogen, feel good. So there's some interesting usage, obviously, culturally, ethno-religiously, ethnobotany in the Southwest of America and Mexico. And I really want to, again, going back to why we're natural entheogens, I can't do any R&D if I'm just synthesizing psilocybin. But if I bring in a mushroom or a cacti, I can see what else is going on. Mushrooms have 14 active ingredients, 4, 5, 6 tryptamines. We're using mutant strains up to 1.5% psilocybin that don't look like mushrooms anymore. Crazy strains from our mycologist. And the loss of understanding those other tryptamines, for instance, the sedative or analgesic or anesthetic properties in some of these other tryptamines would be lost. So again, we're really trying to understand from shamans, from the historical usage, from the fact that our tryptamine receptors, serotonergic receptors, shut down. They sort of, as described to me, shut down physically. And that's why you can't really experience a trip or a therapeutic hallucinatory event from psilocybin mushrooms every day. Your body, your receptors know when to say no. And that's very powerful because it's non-addictive. And really, when you talk about SSRIs, which you could argue are addictive only based on one thing, the withdrawal, physically addictive. Certainly it's not always mental addictive because people don't want to be on SSRIs, but the fact that psilocybin, psilocybe mushrooms, the genera, are non-addictive is really why I do believe there should be a natural health product and perhaps deregulated or pharmacy as opposed, OTC as opposed to a real finished drug product like Paxil or Prozac. I do believe that there is a way to go here. And the acceptance has been much faster than cannabis. Cannabis started in 2001 in Canada and recreationally legalized in 2017. When we look at how quickly in Canada, at least, the regulatory environment has changed from Section 56 to SAP to now talking about how do we have successful clinical trials so we can actually have finished drug products. It's only been a couple of years. There were in cannabis 3 seminal Supreme Court cases in Canada, and we are seeing a couple here. TheraPsil is leading the way in terms of challenging the constitutionality of the Section 56 exemption on compassionate grounds. So again, Canada leads the way. Toronto, Bay Street, as opposed to Wall Street, leads the way in value creation, retail investor, wealth creation, and ultimately betting on horses. We've already seen some companies fall by the wayside. I think primarily because they raised more than they thought and put all the money to use as opposed to patient. I say we're a company that has patience for patients, CE for TS. So we're taking a slow roll because we can't guarantee regulatory allowance on a large level anytime soon. But we have to be patient for the patients, the people that need to be quote unquote cured, because how can they get access right now? How can we facilitate that? Not necessarily as a private biotech company, but on behalf of associations, Supreme Court cases, and certainly these great nonprofits like TheraPsil that are fighting the good fight.
Right. And when it comes to kind of looking at the future of, say, both compassionate use in Canada that you mentioned, along with just the regulatory changes that, will hopefully allow more of these compounds to become available for therapeutic use. What do you see happening kind of within the psychedelic industry when you look, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, based on your experience?
So, we have the Spravato or the esketamine by Johnson & Johnson to look out. Obviously, there was a history. It was sort of an animal tranquilizer. It has been used before. It's been proven to be relatively safe, although ketamine, let's not forget, is called Special K, is a street drug with abuses. People fall into K-holes. I'm not saying that happens therapeutically, but it is different than a classic psychedelic. It's certainly not a psychedelic in terms of it doesn't work on the tryptamine receptors. It works in the glutamatergic receptors as a dissociative. So it gives short-term relief, but actually a research paper came out 2 months ago, and without being controversial, it proved for the time being that there's no long-term benefit because it's not resetting the serotonergic receptors. But it definitely teaches us how to get in the game, which is, a lot of historical use proving that it's quote unquote non-toxic in the intravenous environment and that you have clinics to do it safely. For me, I'm really hoping that the 3 or 4, if you want to include LSD, classic psychedelics are allowed because there's such historical use of non-addiction and safe usage. Clearly, one could take too large of a dose, if I could use that non-technical term. But in reality, with an MD or a psychiatrist watching you for the first or second time on a 25 milligram dose, why not be able to walk out with a prescription for 1 or 2 milligrams that does not need to be administered in a hospital or clinical setting with an MD or a psychiatrist right in front of you, or therapists and psychologists, but in terms of the actual prescription. So I am hoping that clinical trials, whether it's Usona Institute, who I heard is in phase 3 for Psilocybin, or another company, will open the floodgates. But there are only going to be so many products, as I said earlier. There's not going to be 5 different companies with a 25 milligram Psilocybin because there's really no differentiation. Maybe there's a natural versus synthetic, but we're seeing that they work relatively similar. The single naturally derived Psilocybin molecule versus synthetically, it's not as problematic as what we see in cannabis. So I'm hoping that Canada, the Health Canada, and the government will not necessarily wait 4 more years for a Canadian trial to prove, but create its own path. And this is wishful thinking, but just like the ACMPR Cannabis Act, called C-45 at the beginning, allowed designated growers, allowed medical usage. We have that framework that works. We have dealers licensed that are creating the APIs, and we have what we're building towards Cubed, as well as a DL, is a drug establishment license, which enables us to make finished products. In this context, most of the psychedelics we talk about are water soluble alkaloids. So that means they're a little easier than cannabis, soft gel, oil-based oil on oil emulsions or lipid profiles, much easier to make a pill, a little pressed tablet, or intravenous, or some people are talking about inhalers, nasal sprays. I don't like nasal sprays because no one in the past, no shaman, they might put other things up their nose, snuff, etc., tobacco related things for their ceremonies. But, mostly this has been orally ingested over time. Obviously, the decoction of the ayahuasca brew has been, orally imbibed. So I don't know which one is more likely, a successful Canadian, and I'm talking just about Canada, clinical trial, or Canada allows these APIs through dealer's license and drug establishment licenses, or they carve out and copy paste the Cannabis Act. I don't know. I don't personally care as long as we can get products into patients' mouths, literally, and help them on their de-traumatization, if I could say, as opposed to curing or healing. I think that the public support of psychedelics and the interest from all types of people will push the governments, and hopefully the US will legalize, but I believe we'll see successful clinical trials run through the FDA before we see in Canada. Some of them are coterminous, run at the same time, but really the FDA is the holy grail, obviously, for biotechs.
Right. I think you made a really important point, about ketamine, because that's, definitely the research that I've seen. It seems like, ketamine is a great sort of like rescue drug for people who are, extremely depressed on the verge of, suicidality. But I also have not seen those like long-term studies showing there, much benefit. Whereas like psilocybin, seeing like after a single dose, people experiencing relief from depressive symptoms like a year after. I mean, that's right. Incredible.
Years after, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not here to discredit ketamine. It is the available last resort for people that really need this dissociative process, as you said, perhaps going towards suicide. I personally have tried ketamine. It was not an enjoyable experience. And the people I talk to anecdotally, investors, friends, people have family members that are either trying to get out of addiction or have mental illness or taking ketamine in Canada legally with Spravato, the esketamine, the Johnson & Johnson product. If it works, it works, continue. But what I've seen in these papers is there's no long-term. So we're getting people hooked on a model where you might take it once a week. I've heard a couple different protocols. I just find that where it came from and its abuse profile or proclivity to abuse is not something I want to personally bring to market. So there is quite a big difference. We're talking about different receptors, which means a lot of the research might not be done when it's done on tryptamines. It might not be done on the glutamate. It might not be done on the GABA receptors. But again, if it works for someone with side effects, it's not always enjoyable, the ketamine experience. But I know people that certainly benefited, as we said, in this sort of urgent model. But I would suggest there's other ways, to try mushrooms. It's certainly been culturally sort of decriminalized in a lot of areas, whether it's Colorado just voted after decriminating to really create a model there without sort of a commercial path, which I think is intriguing. Oakland, California is trying to quote unquote legalize without commercialization. And we're seeing Oregon, Washington, they're going to have more like regulatory frameworks. On the East Coast, because I spent 20 years in New York, we're seeing more of a medical profile. New York's talking about it, but really I believe New Jersey, Florida, there will most likely, and you can elaborate on Florida if you've heard anything, I believe that there will be a medical psychedelic state program in the East Coast in at least one or two states. So that hopefully, comes quicker than later. And whether it's naturally derived mushrooms or imported, exported, synthesized psilocybin, it's really about getting relief into people as quickly as possible. Obviously, we want proper clinical trials, PK, toxicity, everything to be done according to FDA guidelines, but there are certainly different modalities and pathways to dosing.
And in terms of, the different forms of these psychedelics, I know you guys are working like in manufacturing different forms, such as like gel caps, capsules, tablets, sublingual strips, tinctures, nasal sprays. For people who might not be directly involved in like the psychedelic industry, but people who are just very interested and curious to see, what's out there and what's going to be out there in the future. Like what are some of the exciting kind of like formulations that people might not know about that are currently being, tested or produced?
Well, just coming out of ketamine, it's a lozenge that some people are taking. I refer to it more intravenously, but that's a little bit more antiquated from what I've heard. As I said, these are water soluble indole alkaloids. They're not like cannabis, but in cannabis you can't just eat flower because it's THCA. You need to decarboxylate it, which is not similar, but the sort of or dephosphorylation of psilocybin as a prodrug to psilocin. One of the quote unquote holy grails in our industry is finding how to stabilize psilocin. Because the liver takes it and it takes 20 minutes at that point, perhaps 20 to 45 minutes to be active. But if we're extracting psilocin, how do we keep it stable? So, we're working on that. I know a lot of companies are, as I said, are talking about the liquefaction. So an asthma type pump spray, a nasal spray. Again, I'm a little worried about that. I have heard it's not exactly fun, some of these chemicals when they hit the nose. So again, a pill, 1, 2, 10, or 25 milligrams psilocybin pill, or a full spectrum ethanol extract, like in a dropper form, seems to be the easiest. As a manufacturer, obviously, two things. I always want to find novel, better bioavailable methods. And I also eventually want to be able to satisfy clients as well, not just myself, who have successful clinical trials, and we have the APIs naturally and synthetically to make a finished drug product for pharmacy distribution. So on that regard, it's more of like a sterile environment when you talk about liquids and needles and intravenous and nasal sprays. It's a little higher, GMP classification, but we have enough room to build out. But most of this would be predicated on what the third party client wants. I have seen some fascinating things like, similar to the blood sugar thing you keep on the back of your arm, with the little needles going in, and almost like a Nespresso pod concept, K-cups or whatever you want to call them, where you can dose whatever psychedelic over a certain amount of time. But I really think, we need to make this easy. We need to, again, learn from black market, gray market, white market. Really what I mean is historical usage. People don't like the taste of mushrooms. They like, Mike Tyson will chomp on it and fill his mouth with mushrooms. Most people don't like that. That's where the extract or pill comes in. And when I say the extract, it doesn't just mean the one API psilocybin. There could be strain-specific extracts in decriminalized areas where you're getting the whole plant, or in this case, the whole fungus, which obviously in cannabis has a huge value. THC distillate isolated alone has almost no value in the Canadian market because it was all the licensed producers took all their bad cannabis they couldn't sell as flower, and there was a glut of thousands of kilograms of distillate. Obviously, there is a place when you're making, you're building up with terpenes, different flavors, but the US had problems with the vitamin E and the popcorn lungs, and Canada got very scared. Quebec banned vapes to this day, although I believe they're talking about bringing CBD vapes back. So, I want to do what consumers want, which is full spectrum natural products. So the closest I can get to that in a lab environment, knowing that I'm starting with real mushrooms, real cacti, and ayahuasca, there's synthetic and natural ways to extract DMT from plants and woods that are not from the Amazonian basin in Brazil, Ecuador, Peru, etc., Colombia, and are, more sustainable and certainly not taking anything out of the Amazon.
I'm really glad you transitioned the conversation here. This is actually where the next question I was going to ask you, in terms of like, with the cannabis industry, how it's like we see these products that are full spectrum, and they talk about the entourage effect of these different cannabinoids all kind of working in synergy, to produce kind of this greater therapeutic effect. And I wanted to kind of, just talk more about, with different psychedelics in terms of whether they're, natural or synthetic, just what you've seen in terms of, can an isolated, chemicals such as like psilocin, is that going to produce pretty similar therapeutic benefits compared to if, someone was to eat, an eighth of, real actual mushrooms, or, similar sort of things? Like what have you noticed?
So really, we're talking about the entourage effect experienced in cannabis versus semi-synthetically derived psilocybin. So I will say off the top, synthetics are way less problematic in psychedelics than they were in cannabinoids. Clearly, a semi-synthetically derived psilocybin API from Compass or whomever, Onyx, and a couple of British companies, Cygen here in Alberta, they work. They are proving that they work. So I don't disparage between the two. Now, I already said, naturally derived, natural entheogens allow for more R&D and taking historical knowledge forward for helping people that don't live in South America. But I will tell you that Dr. Jeffrey Guy from GW, who I mentioned, told me personally that the entourage effect is a bit of a misnomer. And I didn't bring this up at Wonderland because I didn't have time, but his concept is based on the definition. When we say entourage effect, the assumption is that the sum is greater than the parts. That, entourage, not just myrcene or limonene or humulene or THCV, CBN, CBD, all these cannabinoids and terpenes and polysterols and flavonoids, the concept that they sort of build up and help THC more than the sum of their parts, Dr. Guy thinks is incorrect, because he thinks that they all have their own power. Now, you could debate that and say myrcene helps things go over the blood-brain barrier, so that actually turbocharges others. That's sort of a singular event from what I've read. But what's so liberating about Dr. Jeffrey Guy's statement is that there's so much R&D to look at. There's a lot of synthetic companies saying they can make it cheaper than natural. I disagree based on my mycologist and our projections and our work pre-license. These products started at $7 million a kilogram, psilocybin, then went to 5, 4, 3. It's now at about 2 million Canadian for not for a kilogram, for grams. And I think we'll get down to about 500,000 to $1 million per kilogram. So very valuable. But if I'm extracting it naturally, I have all these other great tryptamines, right? These things that I can put towards, as opposed to psychiatric clinical trials and research, biomedical research. So sedatives, anesthesia without side effects. There's some very interesting properties going on. So the question is, eating a mushroom versus eating the equivalent. Let's say if it's a gram of mushrooms, you get 10 milligrams of, on average, 1%, you get 10 milligrams of psilocybin naturally biosynthesized from the fungus versus equivalent 10 milligrams. Will you have a difference? Now, Alan Rockefeller and a couple of people just today published, he's a great mycologist out of California who goes down to Mexico, and he's a strain hunter. He was saying that some of this bioanalytical research they did in Czechoslovakia, I believe I just read it this morning, shows that there are MAO-inhibitors, the REMAs, the reversible MAOs that don't last 10 days, meaning MAO-inhibitors that are healthy for us to take with DMT, et cetera, like ayahuasca, are inherent in psilocybe mushrooms, meaning there are some factors that help. Essentially, MAOs, I talk about myrcene, the blood-brain barrier. MAOs help the molecules, the psychedelics like DMT, through the gut. They really protect it. The monoamine oxidase inhibitors protect it from being broken down. Whereas, DMT, you can't just eat. It's like THC. You need to vape it or send it down your digestive path with an MAO inhibitor, or essentially smoke it, to heat it up. So it's very similar to THCA. So there is, in the Venn diagram of cannabis versus psychedelics, there's quite a big overlap, but it sort of ends where pharma begins and where there is no real knowledge of the other actives. We're getting in some analytical spikes 14 active molecules in psilocybin mushrooms, whereas by now, even though the federal US government didn't really want too much cannabinoid research, we know that THCV increases energy, decreases appetite, and that fundamentally, just like terpenes are there not to help humans, but to protect the plant from predators, the THCV is equatorial and found in Durban poison and cannabis from Africa or South America near the equator, because THCV actually blocks UV light. So it's very interesting to see what naturally helped protect these plants or fungi from grow. So that questions, are the tryptamines, is psilocybin there for predators to eat and be confused rather than, get rid of the quote unquote a depression episode? Did humans modify it along the way? Obviously in Mexico, there's large historical usage, especially with chocolate. Or is it just a coincidence? And I would proffer it is just a coincidence, a great coincidence, that cannabinoids, terpenes in cannabis or marijuana, and the tryptamines and polysterols, et cetera, in psilocybin mushrooms are just a happy, great coincidence. But we definitely need to study all the molecules in mushrooms to get up to the point where cannabis is, where we know CBN helps with sleep. Maybe we don't understand every function. We certainly don't understand CBD at all. It's not really a cannabinoid. To me, it scrubs the receptors. It cleans the CB1 and CB2 receptors. And that's why it's perhaps not a panacea for every illness, but it certainly helps a lot of people in a lot of areas, especially seizures. And we're seeing, if we want to get a little more interesting or out there, it seems like autistic children have way more cannabinoid receptors, but very small. Now, there is some talk about what the mother took, like Tylenol, but I don't want to go there. The point is, our cannabinoid receptors and the instantaneous ability for our body to biosynthesize, make 2-AG and anandamide, the two endogenous cannabinoids, is very fascinating to learn from and really understand at the serotonergic receptor level what we now know at the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites, because no one knew that we had internal cannabinoids 10 years ago. Certainly researchers did, but the average layman citizen in North America did not understand that at all. So there's so much to learn about the periphery and the secondary non-psilocybin, non-psilocin, tryptamines and et cetera molecules, that we have to look at it from a natural side. I do not want to miss the potential biomedical molecules coming out of these fascinating genera and species of mushrooms.
Well said. So, Adam, we're coming up onto the end of the show. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm so, intrigued to just learn about, Cubed Biotech and the awesome work that you guys are doing. And for listeners who also kind of want to follow you guys or connect with you, where would you direct them to?
Yep. So cubebiotech.com, CUBEDBIOTECH.com. Adam_cubed at Instagram, my personal business page, and then Cube Biotech on Instagram as well. We do also go on Twitter. Or you can just send me an email, Adam@CubeBiotech. Always happy to talk to anyone in the space who's an expert or not. And I'll certainly answer your email. And thank you, Toby. I mean, just to wrap this up, we are natural entheogen producers based in Montreal. We're almost done build out. We've raised over $10 million in Canadian capital, including last month, which is very unique. And I think it's just impressing upon our unique, focused, niche-based business plan, which is to produce APIs from natural sources, classic psychedelics, the big three: psilocybin, mescaline, and DMT / the MAO, really the harmine, harmalol, and harmaline, the harmala alkaloids in the vine, as opposed to most of our competitors that are doing great work on the synthetic side. I just think it really opens us up to a an appreciation of shamanic cultural usage, to the modern day CEO in Silicon Valley that's microdosing. Anywhere in between, certainly we've seen a huge benefit from classic psychedelics, and we hope really our main goal is to be the #1 manufacturer for our own clinical trials and other partners in biotech and pharma, to distribute in North America and across the world medications that heal, not medications that you will be on for the rest of your life, but medications that fulfill the spiritual and paradox that the more you take, the less you need.
Absolutely. I think that's truly awesome work that you guys are doing. And we'll certainly include links to all everything that you said there in the show notes. And for people who enjoy the show, you can listen to the episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or most other major audio streaming platforms. If you prefer to watch the episode, the full episode will be posted on our YouTube channel. That's Neuroflex, NUROFLEX. Love to hear your guys' feedback. If there's any people that you guys want to see on the show, or if you just have any questions, comments, thoughts whatsoever, please send me an email, toby@neuroflex.com, or you can also shoot us a DM. We are Neuroflex Florida on Instagram. Adam, again, I wanted to just thank you so much for your time today and coming on the show. Really, really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you very much, Toby, for the opportunity. Take care.
Absolutely.